Ready to rock and roll? Unique New York. The human was denied a bank loan today. Hey folks, Ryan here from Mr. Row's Gaming Rants and Reviews, and we've got a good old faced shaking rant. I haven't done a rant video in quite some time, so thank you, friend of the show, good friend of mine, the red-headed Jedi himself, Ian. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been far too long since you've had a rant, so I got to help out.
Yeah, where we were chit chatting one day. He's like, "What's your next rant going to be?" I'm like, I don't know. I'm starting to run out of ideas of what I can complain about, and I think Ian here, and before we even get going, Ian's been mentioned before in previous videos as being the person that got me into the gaming hobby, and
yeah, sorry, internet.
He's the reason why. Well, no, I'm the reason why I have a big shelves of
yeah, don't
games.
blame me for that. That's all you.
Yeah, but you opened my world to this thing that we call board gaming. Ian, I think, has a really interesting thing that he wants to kind of get off his chest, though. And when he pitched it to me, I said, you know what? That actually does irk me quite a bit. So let's see what we can come up with here, Ian.
Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. So we're going to talk about Board Game Geek and specifically how they organize and categorize their games. So I've been noticing lately that with Board Game Geek, you've got normally, I mean, a game is a game, but of course, in this hobby that we're in, there's second editions and new printings and all of this stuff happening in this edition and that edition. And Board Game Geek has kind of gotten into this habit of creating individual pages for every single version of a game. So it's not just all under one title, right? So if you've got what would be a good example? Let's go with Eclipse, because Eclipse just kind of had that new edition came out, right? That second edition.
Right.
But there's not just one entry for Eclipse. There now has to be two specific entries. I find this frustrating and confusing for a number of reasons. Where do you sit on this, Ryan?
Yeah. So I've tracked this quite a number of times, and especially because in a separate part of the hobby, I'm into usually Kickstarter editions of games, and Board Game Geek and users have been uploading. There may be a version of game, and then there is also another entry that is Kickstarter edition of game, and that does there no there doesn't, because if I have a rules question or if I want to find out information of the game, which one am I going to? Which one's getting the most traffic, or are they splitting the traffic between the two games
Right.
separately? Like, no, I totally, yeah, I'm totally on with you with this one.
Right. So that's actually a really good point, is the rules idea. Because in most cases the rules are going to be pretty similar. Different editions will have tweaks and all that. But for photos and things, because people like to upload photos and stuff, and that one makes a little bit more sense because that's very specifically these photos go with this edition. But then again, that's as long as everybody's on the same page. Because if you're taking pictures of this new edition of Eclipse and just putting them in the old one because you don't know any better, well, then that gets confusing too. I guess that's for moderators and to kind of take over. But another problem I have with this is, well, let's some of us real big geeks out there, and I know that you're one of these, Ryan. You like to log your games, right?
Oh, yes.
So, and if you're logging through like the Board Game Geek database, well, now you've got to think about what edition that you played. Well, no, you all just want to keep it all in one place, right? If I want to know how many times I played Eclipse, I just want to know how many times I've played Eclipse. I don't want to
Right.
have to look, oh, well, I've played this version this many times and this version this many times. you don't know. You
Yeah.
just want to know.
Yeah. So
And fun. Yeah.
yep, yep. No, I got this. I have a game on my shelf back here. It's Genties. I have the Deluxeified edition. There are two entries in Board Game Geek. There's Genties and Genties Deluxeified edition.
And that
And
doesn't need to happen.
no, it absolutely doesn't. Because the only difference between the two games is that one's got fancier components than the other. The gameplay is essentially exactly the same. So I guess the rule question, or sorry, not the rule, but the question here comes is, how much of the rules need to change? Now I know there is times when there is big rule changes from a first edition to a second edition to a third edition. I'm talking about something like Twilight Imperium. Going from the third edition to the fourth edition, there is quite a difference in the rule set
Right.
for the game. So I guess
Yeah, but
how
the
much?
problem is yeah, who's setting that line? Because there are some people who out there who is like, well, in this rule it says you have to roll the dice with your right hand, but this one it changes it so you have to roll it from your left hand. Well, that's a whole different game. Like some people will just make think the minor changes are like a whole new game. Well,
Yeah,
no, there's just a minor change. It's still the same game. I would even this is my extreme view, but I would even say something like yeah, I don't know the Twilight Imperium differences, but it's still all from
right.
the core game set, right?
The core game is still essentially there. It's just how we're playing out the game is going to be quite different. I'm going to pitch out an idea here to you, and I want to see what your view is. If you're changing the rule set enough that you're playing a different game, shouldn't they be calling it something else at that point?
Yeah, that's a good point. But
Because I'm looking
but
at
then you're
a game like Voyages of Marco Polo, and then there's
mhm.
Marco Polo 2. They are essentially the same game. Like what you're doing in your turns is essentially the same, but they've changed it enough that it's a completely different experience. And so therefore they actually just called it a second, like they called it a completely different thing from the first one. And
Yeah.
that I agree with. So I'm thinking that if you're changing the rules or changing the game enough, that it should actually just be a second like Twilight Imperium fourth edition probably could have been called Twilight Imperium something else instead of just saying Twilight Imperium. Well, I guess they did. They called
Yeah.
it fourth edition. They called it fourth edition.
But that's and that's I mean, you know me. We've done a podcast together. You know that game names are something that really gets me going. but um but I think that's where naming is important because I think it's there's this weird discrepancy that it's hard to make with board games where it's different editions versus like an actual sequel to the game.
Mm,
Whereas the Marco Polo, they actually call it Marco Polo 2 as though it's a completely separate sequel game. Whereas with the Twilight Imperium, they didn't call it Twilight Imperium 4, even though that's what everybody calls it. That's not what it's called.
yeah.
It's called, Edition 4, whatever it is. And it's like it's saying it's we're just taking this game and just upgrading it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to wonder where's the individuality of that game. Like a game is if a game is a game, then it's a game. A little redundant maybe, but like for example, if I'm looking at my um, I'm a big movie fan, so I like to
Mm-hmm.
relate it back to my movie collection. But like I don't have like Star Wars original edition and then Star Wars second edition as though they're two different movies. I
Mm.
mean, one's clearly better than the other, but we won't get in there. But you know what I mean? Like I don't think of a theatrical cut and a director's cut, which is kind of equivalent, I would think, in board game world, right? A little minor
Yeah.
changes, but it's essentially the same thing. Like I don't treat them as separate films, it's one movie. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's what I think of it as. So that's kind of the same thing with games.
So
And that's kind of where I think Board Game Geek should go with this, right? Where you don't have separate entries, and so you're just flooding the site with entries. Have like an umbrella entry, right?
mm,
So This is the Ticket to Ride entry, and then these are the editions of Ticket to Ride, Ticket to Ride 10th anniversary. You can have like little subcategories underneath.
Yes.
Eclipse is the umbrella. Here are the editions underneath that. And I think that would make organizing for people much better.
Okay. So
Now,
this
I'm
was
not a
that
web
that was
designer. I have no idea how difficult that would be, but
Yeah, so that was going to be my next thing. I said, what would be Board Game Geek's fix for this? Because they already have, if you look at Board Game Geek deep enough underneath the game entry, they actually already have a tab called versions.
yes,
But
they do.
what they're using that versions for is like different language editions, essentially. What they're kind of doing, or different, like if it's been produced by a different publisher or something like that. Like there is this game publisher A, this game publisher B, this game English edition, Chinese edition, French edition type
Yeah.
thing.
And they've had that for years. It's
Yeah.
almost like they're just ignoring their own functionality there, right?
Yeah, because I agree with you that we should have just the umbrella. We have the one that really bugs me because it's really skewed on Board Game Geek right now is a game that I reviewed called Meeples and Monsters. It was a Kickstarter game. I picked up the retail edition, and when I went to go post my stuff, I had no idea where to actually, because there's like nothing posted on the retail edition, like the Meeples and Monsters site,
Oh,
but everything is being posted under the Meeples and Monsters Kickstarter edition entry. But I'm like, well, that's not true because I'm not talking about the Kickstarter edition. I'm talking about this one. And so
right.
the traffic's not going to get to my video because I took the more proud moment and said, no, I'm not talking about Kickstarter. I'm going to post it in here. No one's going to ever see it, but c'est la vie, I guess. But I think we
And
should
there's no
have.
way Kickstarter edition should be having their own entry. That's just
No,
ridiculous.
no. You
Oh,
can make mention on that site that there is a Kickstarter edition available, and this is what they look like, and you can, like, come on, Board Game Geek, you can make this happen. The web, you're paying people to do web design for you. I'm pretty sure that this could actually happen.
I mean,
I'm pretty sure.
I think so. Like, this is obviously a problem that's come up, especially as the hobby's been expanding and these new editions are happening, and they're just little bit different than the other one, and so
Mm-hmm.
on and so forth. And so they realized they had to present it, but their solution was just separate thing for everything, separate thing for everything. And yeah,
Yeah.
and here's another problem with that because we could probably do a whole other rant, and I don't know if you have or not, or if you're planning to on the top 100 of Board Game Geek,
Mm,
but one major problem with that list, and before people dismiss that list, the list has a level of importance because that's where a lot of like new gamers go when they start getting into the hobby and they say, what's out there? Let's check out what's out there. And they see this list. And so the way that list works is actually quite important, but it's really getting watered down with all these different versions. So, like, for example, now this is a different case because I would argue, and you'll probably agree, I'm mostly arguing through you because you've told me about these, but Gloomhaven and Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion are probably separate editions. But again, if it's an umbrella system, they could probably fit together. But
yeah.
like they're 1 and 4, so they're taking up 2 spots in the top five. Eclipse, like we just talked about, is 29 and it's 66 for the two versions, so it's
Hmm.
taken up 2 spots. Agricola is taken up 41 and 77 for like the revised edition.
Right.
There's no reason that a revised edition and the regular edition need to be separated there.
Hmm.
Dominion Intrigue is in the list, which is like it's a standalone expansion of Dominion that probably could have just been Dominion in that spot. Like it's take all these games, these multiple versions of games are taking up all these spots that other games could be in there that can be exposed to new people coming onto the website and seeing things. So
Yeah.
that's another real big
I'm
problem, I
I'm
think.
I'm glad that you brought this one up. That one has always really bugged me. Especially I had jotted down the Agricola one because there is no change. They may have just like kind of updated a little bit. There might be some different cards that are in the revised edition versus like the original edition.
Right.
But they're the same. That's the same game
Yeah.
in there. So, uh, and plus
And I
you're
think with
splitting the
this,
votes, right? Like you're splitting the
yeah,
votes
that's
or
true.
how the algorithm works based on the traffic that those games are generating and the comments and the whatnots, it's being split between two games. If you actually would have probably combined that data between those two versions, Agricola would be ranked way much higher. So
Yeah, I agree with you. It probably would. And then I think if BGG does, like, if they were to listen to us, because we're very influential people in the board game world, right?
Right.
So clearly they're listening to us and they're taking all that we're saying when
Oh,
writing
I'll make sure that they see this video. I will promote the crap out of this thing.
But I think that can, because then you've got a groundwork to work with expansion entries too, and because that starts to get ridiculous, especially when you get to like the little promo sets that have their own entry, and then BGG treats them like in the stats and everything as though they're actual individual games.
Right.
Like one of the most ridiculous ones is the Kill Dr. Lucky, his little dog expansion, which is literally just like a dog meeple.
Yeah.
That's all that it is. And so that has its own entry. So that has basically the same amount of weight in that sense as Twilight Imperium.
Yeah, because you can go to the
same thing.
You can go to the Kill Dr. Lucky dog meeple page, and it has its own forum for it, and it's everything that's set up exactly for a regular board game. Is all set up for that. You could have like rules questions about that one promo. You could have everything. You can have photos of that promo. Yeah, it gets the full treatment.
You click own, and then it puts it in as an entry, as though it's in your collection like any other game.
Right, because this really bugged you when you were looking at my collection one day, and you're like, no way that Ryan owns like 700 games. But I had clicked on expansions, and you're like, oh, if you filter out all the expansions, it's actually only like 300 and some.
And there is a way you can filter out expansions when you're looking at people's collections, but it should just automatically be that, because I don't know.
It should actually automatically just
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of this, Ian. This thing really bugs me, and I'm pretty sure, with my very limited web design background, if you were just to sit out and just mind map this thing, you could make this happen. Definitely just have the one entry for, I'm going to take the Gloomhaven example because I actually argue that should just be the same thing. They're both. I know Jaws of the Lion is just a little bit different, but it's the exact same experience that you're getting with Gloomhaven. It's just kind of more of an introductory entry level. I think it should have been part of the actual Gloomhaven package to begin with. I'm getting off on a whole separate thing, but I think that those two should not be occupying 2 of the top 5 spots. It should only be 1 of the top 5 spots.
I agree.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah. So there we go. I'm glad you agree with me. That's 2. We just have to convince a few more minds here.
I don't think I'm going to put this one out when I release this video. I'm going to put this out onto the Board Game Geek social medias and everything. They have a Discord channel. They have a Facebook page and everything like that. I'm going to ask this question. I want to see how people actually react to this, because I doubt, Ian, that we're alone in this. We can't be alone.
Yeah.
This
I don't think so.
This irks me. Not a lot of things irk me, but this one is one that just like, why? So.
Yeah, it kind of is just making a real mess of the whole system.
Yeah.
You need to clean it up.
Perfect.
Tighten it up.
And Board Game Geek, if you're going through this whole website overhaul, which they kind of been doing for the past few years, like cleaning up the user interface and everything, now is the time. The time. The time is nigh. to get this done. Sit down.
Right, because they've been doing a lot of improvements on the site, so this can just be one of those.
Absolutely,
that's what I think.
Right on. Thank you, Ian. That was a very good topic. We got actually a lot more out of that than I thought we were going to go into. But hey, that's the way. That's awesome. The way we roll. When like minds come together. So
you get stuff done.
Yes. So Board Game Geek, get your like minds together, mind map that thing out. Give us this. What do you want to call it? The umbrella system.
Right. The umbrella system. Yeah. Let's make it work.
We'll call it that. Thank you, Ian, for coming on tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Is there anything else that you would like to say before we get on?
Um, I don't know. Like and subscribe. Is that what people say on YouTube?
Oh, thanks, Ian. Yeah, you can check out Ian on his Twitter account. Is the at Redheaded Jedi.
Yeah,
That's really the only social media I know that you really regularly interact with. So,
that's pretty much it. Yeah.
but you actually have your own podcast, a movie
Yeah.
podcast. You want to plug that?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I've started a movie podcast last year. We've been going. We got 50 episodes now, so we're,
Ooh, congratulations.
yeah. Thanks. We're going pretty strong. So it's called Cinema in Seconds. So we just look at small moments in movies and talk about them and dissect them and check it out.
Yeah,
It's a lot of fun.
it's very entertaining and very. I've known Ian for quite some time, so I've kind of honed in what his tastes in movies have been. He's quite quirky, but he's very lovable.
Thanks.
All right. And yeah, this is the moment where I say, hey, if you enjoy the content that this channel is creating, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the little bell to get notified when new videos get released. And of course, drop a comment in below this video. Do you agree with us? Do you not agree with us? I want to know what your take is on Board Game Geek having these multiple entries for exactly the same games, these different editions getting their own entries. Get that out of our face. We got to clean this. Like how Ian says, we need to clean this stuff up. And also consider liking this video so that it gains traction in the YouTube verse land thing, whatever they want to call it. And Ian, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
All right, folks, this rant is officially over.